this century, our understanding of them is just going to completely blow our minds. So the Schumann Resonances just have this interesting connection to everything. They make up Earth's brainwaves. They could be part of a collective consciousness because any energy field is also an information field. Planetary resonances are also the synodic cycles of the planets meeting in space with conjunctions, oppositions, trines, things of this nature. Sacred geometry basically baked throughout the entire solar system. There's the foundational quantum expression, and what that's going to manifest depends on how we work with our own chaos energies. At some point, we learn to master our control over the astral realm, where you can just create things out of nothing. This is very much like an ancient Sumerian understanding, and even like a Paleolithic understanding of astrology. We're in this very significant shift going from Pisces to Aquarius, and we're going into Saturnian energies, away from these more nebulous domains. When does that occur is a big question. It's this really mysterious energy field that permeates across the entire planet, and it's first theorized in the early 1950s, and then they actually observed it in the late 1950s. It's super low in its intensity, but that's not necessarily as important as people think. It still has these rich biologic interactions, and it's Earth's actual resonant energy field because it has certain resonant characteristics with the Earth. Its wavelength is the same as Earth's circumference, and then there's higher modes, and they stack with our brainwaves, and it's a really interesting thing. I personally found out about it through my last job before I embarked on my own path with doing, I call this sabbatical, where I wanted to do a lot more research on things like this. Like the Schumann resonances were one of those things like, this is insane. I need some actual time. So I'm not rushing myself to learn about this. I need time and space to really try to understand what they are. And so I first heard about them when we were out in the field. I was with my old coworker, Doug Groom, and he does a lot of magnetotelluric surveys. And basically what that is you put some steel probes in the ground and you measure the electrical vibrations of the ground. There's natural electric vibrations. These are telluric currents. I talk about those on the channel. And then there's also active magnetotellurics where you push in energy and then you basically listen to the response, and that allows you to come to some conclusions about the subsurface. And you can use this for like mineral exploration or finding groundwater to drill well, a whole bunch of things, mining, whatever. But we were looking at the data, and it covers the entire frequency range from low frequency to high frequency. And there's these peaks that showed up. And we were doing the active magnetotellurics as well. I was like, but what are this like natural frequency structures? He said, those are the Schumann resonances. Like, don't really concern yourself with them. We're looking at other things, other frequencies. He's like, they just are naturally there. It doesn't matter where you go, you'll observe those. And I was like, that's interesting, because the geology is always different wherever you are. You go one place, it's going to be different geology. You go somewhere else, different geology. But these are just somehow like omnipresent everywhere. And so I just read a basic research paper on them, I think pretty soon afterwards, and it started to blow my mind. And they're connected to so many different things, excluding like biophysics, consciousness, and spirituality, just geophysics. They're crazy because you can use them as a global thermometer, because they're connected to the global electric circuit and weather activity. In general, if the temperature of the planet goes up, you have more weather activity created by lightning strikes. And so with more weather activity, you have more lightning strikes, and there's just more electrical charge. And so they increase in power as the temperature goes up. So you can actually use them. It's probably one of the best ways you can accurately measure the changing global temperature. Because of course there's variations across the globe. So you measure the temperature in Antarctica, you measure it in Africa, and all these places. Sometimes it can be hard to get like a consensus of what the global temperature is doing across time, but Schumann resonances are one way to do that. And they have, they observe them everywhere, ground surface. You've observed them in the oceans. Submarines use frequencies near Schumann resonances for communication because they're super deep down. You can't use traditional radio frequencies. They'll get absorbed into water, especially seawater, which is very conductive. It absorbs those frequencies. Schumann resonances don't get absorbed easily, so they broadcast right out. You observe them where we are, troposphere, atmosphere, up to the ionosphere, even bleeding out into space. You observe spikes in the Schumann resonances, sometimes before earthquakes, during earthquakes. They can have anomalous changes to them as like pre-earthquake signals. In January of 2022, with the Hungaha'apai eruption, which is north of New Zealand, the Kermadec Trench and Tonga, the biggest volcanic eruption in the 21st century, there was a global electromagnetic impulse that occurred in the Schumann resonances. So the entire planet for about 2 hours had an increase in those frequencies globally. And some of the research for that came out of Hungary, which is very far away from New Zealand, but they registered the spike in that frequency range from 0 to 40 hertz in the magnetic field and also the electric field. So, they're connected to really big volcanic eruptions. We see how they change during geomagnetic storms and from the solar cycle, which is 12 years long, potentially from longer rhythms of solar activity like Gleisberg cycles, 88 years. There's, also even longer than that. Solar flare impacts, they charge the ionosphere. That will alter the Schumann resonances on the daylight side that's receiving that solar flare. And so they just have this like interesting connection to everything. They're this energy field that's just always resonating, always exists. It's electromagnetic energy, so it's light energy, pulsing 8 times a second, 14 times a second, connecting all of us together. Really, they make up Earth's brainwaves. They connect to our heart rhythms. They could be a candidate for at least part of a collective consciousness, because any energy field is also an information field. So if we're all, working with them and connected to them in terms of our brain activity and our thoughts, and that is perhaps we're receiving downloads from them, but also, putting uploads into them, they could explain a lot of things. They're a perfect candidate for explaining a lot of these like psychic or spiritual phenomena that we're trying to understand. We know they exist, but we're still trying to come to a, let's say, more scientific understanding. Not that we need to, but they're there. The understanding's there at the Schumann resonances. So they're wild. And that's what got me into it. That was back in, suppose 2020, 2021, right when there was some really big astrological cycles taking place.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I couldn't help but sort of just perk up around as when the student's ready, the teacher kind of appears. It's like, I mean, I'm just picturing you as the geophysicist hanging out, just measuring some stuff, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, just ignore that. And you're like, ignore what? Wait, what?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's fascinating. I want to know more about that. The thing and I mean, some of these things hidden in plain sight, right? Like until, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. I mean, also, can you explain to us the person that sort of came up with it? Because I've never really, I hadn't. I mean, I'm an engineer, but I never really came to this awareness that there's these two parts of our atmosphere, and there's waves sort of happening in between there, and then also that a lot of what carries charge in our atmosphere is actually water. Like that entire thing was also very important for me to start to wrap my head around as I was embracing your work. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the guy who theorized them was a German chap, and I don't know all of his work. He's most well known for the Schumann resonances. His name is Winfried Otto Schumann, and he was getting further along in his career when he theorized them. And there is some talk, maybe some evidence that Tesla had kind of theorized these things as well. But that research or like just data publication, whatever, isn't readily out there, so we don't exactly know. Of course, a lot of his files were taken upon his death, so maybe it was in there. Regardless, the first real public info on the Schumann resonances was put out in 1952 by Winfried Otto Schumann. Basically, he was a like an atmospheric physicist, and he said, "Hey, if we have this ionosphere up above us, and we know that there's certain oscillation frequencies of plasma, and plasma, because of this natural oscillation that it has, only frequencies that are higher than it can emit from the plasma. And so plasma generates a whole bunch of frequencies because it's naturally resonating, and There's also different coherency domains within, like, let's say a plasmoid or a plasma. And so those that are lower frequency than the natural plasma frequency will stay within the plasmoid, but the higher frequency ones can pass through it. And so, like, for example, radio frequency communication, you need a high enough frequency to cut through the lower part of the ionosphere, the D region or the E region, to then bounce off the F region. And so now you're using megahertz radio waves. If you use lower frequency, then you'll bounce off the D region or the E region, D region being 50 kilometers up on the day side, goes away at night, the E region being about 100 kilometers up, and maybe 120 kilometers up. That stays there day or night, though it decharges at night because you don't have active sunlight coming in. But he's like, hey, like if lightning is producing all this energy across the entire light spectrum, and we know we have the ionosphere and how some waves bounce off of it, we should have the lowest frequency waves, which don't get absorbed easily into things because they have such a low frequency. Every cycle is an opportunity to interact with something at an atomic level, or you could even say at a quanta level, right? Quanta just meaning the smallest observable thing in that system. Quanta of light is a photon. So at the quantum level, every cycle, every waveform is an opportunity of interaction. Well, if you're only cycling 8 times a second, that's way less opportunities to get absorbed into something than if you're cycling 1,000,000 times per second. So he was like, we should be having these extremely low frequency waves bounce off the ionosphere. They're constantly being produced from lightning strikes, and they should form standing waves. And he calculated that waveguide created from the ground surface and the ionosphere, both of them being conductive, about 7 orders of magnitude more conductive than the atmosphere in between, which is very resistive, 10 to negative 14, allowing these magnetic fields to cut through it very easily. If it was conductive, the atmosphere, a magnetic field would get absorbed into it, but because it's resistive, magnetic field isn't absorbed into it easily. So they're able to just propagate through this waveguide. He calculated the Egan frequencies that they're called. He was slightly off with his calculations for a variety of reasons, but just a few years later, they actually observed them. He was fairly close, but they observed them. They're like, hey, these Schumann resonances that you theorize exist. And within just like 10 to 15 years, scientists are already starting to play with them as it relates to brain waves and heart rhythms and like psychedelic experiences. There's some work from the 70s that you have to take with a grain of salt, but this guy supposedly, I think his name was like Ken Beck, that might be his name. He built a massive Schumann coil, and he had someone like lay down on it. He flipped it on, and supposedly within seconds, it triggered like LSD-like symptoms. And so they stopped doing the experiments afterwards because it was like too crazy. But that was like, I think 1973 or 1972, and they were first observed in the late 50s. So like, you know, we already had all this information on brainwaves, the frequency structure of that, because brainwaves are observed, I think, in the 10s or the 20s, like 1920 at the latest. And so all of a sudden, when they observed the frequency range of the Schumann resonances were the same, and also had the same intensity magnetic field with picotesla strength or microvolt strength for the electric field, they're like, they probably have an overlap. And people were pretty open to these things back in the 60s and the 70s. You know, in 1965, you just had a Pluto-Uranus conjunction, sextile Neptune. All the hippies were running around, God bless them. And so people were open to this stuff. But since then, it's kind of gone quiet, you could say, and there's more and more people coming into awareness of them, becoming interested in them. And I think this century, our understanding of them is just going to completely blow our minds. And I think we'll start to tap into them in incredible ways, especially as it relates to the more consciousness aspect to them.
Inspired souls, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to this podcast. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. Episodes like this coming out twice a week, promoting love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. Thank you so much for your support. Well, it's fascinating as well because just knowing what I know about, having studied neuroscience a little bit through this podcast, like we spend most of our day in beta, if we're lucky, alpha, but then as we start to rest at night as well, we start to go into these slower gamma frequencies. And I mean, as you're describing the Schumann resonance, it's quite a bit slower. It makes me wonder kind of where we're resting and kind of what we're charging up and downloading and picking up as we're resting in those dream states and those resting moments as well. And also, like, there's a curiosity within me at this point is like, do we have a conjecture or an idea in terms of what's emitting? Like, is there a source of these Schumann frequencies?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of sources. And so that is an important aspect because most people that do a little bit of research into them, they learn that they're produced by lightning strikes. Because lightning is plasma. You have these massive electromagnetic potentials, and then they're able to equalize because a conductive channel forms between them, and then you get this flow of charge in between those potentials, and you break a lot of molecular bonds, you cause a lot of vibration, and anything that's vibrating produces light photons, effectively. You have these electrons that were put into their valence band, drop back down to, I think it's a valence band. Either way, they become free electrons and then they drop back down to their normal band, and that process releases a light photon. And so you release them across all these different frequencies from near 0 hertz all the way up even into gamma rays. So literally a lightning strike creates light across the entire light spectrum. We only see the visible light with our eyes. If you were really close to one, you'd feel the heat, which is infrared. And if, some sensitive people may feel the lower frequency energy as well, but we don't see it. But it's not just lightning strikes though. Like the sun hitting the ionosphere after it's been decharged at night generates Schumann resonances. Because again, you have plasma now increasing its oscillation, its energy density, you're creating plasma. And so they go up like 10 to 15 to 20% during ionospheric sunrise, which for your location is generally about 40 minutes before actual sunrise because the ionosphere is higher up. Sun is hitting it earlier. So that's one explanation for how some people, that's one possible reason why some people naturally are able to wake up right before sunrise consistently. Because if you have these energy waves that overlap with our brain waves at the same intensity too and frequency, charge up 20% because of ionospheric sunrise, us being resonant with that, we also evolved in these things for millions of years to the best of our knowledge, it's like a tide coming in, it's just going to potentiate brain activity. And some people that are sensitive could just be like, boom, I'm awake. Like, let's go. I noticed that myself. But it's more than that. Like we produce them. So technically we are also emitting into the Schumann resonances. And these are just frequency oscillations. And so also if there's those frequencies embedded within the solar wind, because solar wind's made up of plasma, then you can get a dose technically of Schumann resonances received to the planet if the plasma has those frequencies within it. And I think there's some evidence for that, but regardless, it probably happens every time we get a coronal mass ejection impact. I would not be surprised. We don't have that many probes to measure this, and a lot of people don't look into it. So that's the other limitation here. We see Schumann resonances get generated before earthquakes and sometimes during earthquakes. There seems to be this release of energy from earthquakes, specifically seems to be plasma. And again, plasma is oscillating at these frequencies. So perhaps Schumann resonances really are an expression of like the consciousness of plasma. That's an interesting thing that you could think about. We have our own plasma bodies. The Earth has plasma. The universe is 99% plasma. So yeah, they're just really fascinating. They're like a doorway into all this. And so that's what I got pulled in my first YouTube video. Basically my first one was on the Schumann resonances, like a little 6-minute documentary explainer. And just like a month or two after I released it, it did really, really well. So it like hit the algorithm on search and started getting a lot of views. And I was like, I feel like this is the universe and the Earth herself saying you need to research into this more. And so I did. I'm very happy I did. So yeah, I feel like in many ways I'm working I'm like a messenger of the earth working with her directly to deliver this information. And she gives me guidance and feedback and sometimes gives me opportunities. And other times she's like, you need to refine your approach a little bit and some challenges. But ultimately, it's worked out beautifully and I can't be happier.
Well, as a fellow Virgo,
All
I can
right.
totally, I can totally resonate with. I don't want to sound like, yeah, but I feel you on where you're at. It's really awesome watching your relationship and your dynamic with your work. I think one of the questions that's pertinent, so we can measure temperature, we can start to understand, like, there's a lot of geophysical phenomena, like, okay, so there's this entire environment around us, there's this Schumann resonance that's going on, but you take it a little bit deeper, like not a little bit, actually way deeper. So you mentioned it just before, and we will get into plasma and consciousness a little bit later in the episode, but or maybe this is the right time to segue into it. But what does the Schumann resonance, in your opinion, then have to do with like consciousness? Like, because it seems like for you that there's this real deep connection there.
I think it has a lot of things. Well, let's go through a few of them. I think that it has operated as a collective consciousness for millions of years. And as a stable energy field, it's able to hold on to this information. And I mean, if let's say Facebook went down all the time, like literally every other day it was having some sort of dropout or people weren't able to access it, no one would use it because it's constantly dropping out. You need stable servers. If YouTube was constantly failing people, it'd be a problem. Now and then, once a year or something, not a big deal, 6 hours, whatever, we get over it. But to have these sort of data systems, like let's say natural data systems, you need it to be stable. And the Schumann resonances, based on their physics, what generates them, and the fact that multiple things generate them, are very stable. So it's really the perfect framework. I haven't discovered another geophysical energy field that is better, you could say, for storing information across time. And so, yeah, we drop down into these lower frequencies when we sleep. And I remember having a precognition dream once, to share the story really quickly, where I was transported back to ancient Australia 60,000 years ago. And sometimes in dreams, so yeah, sometimes in dreams, you just know things. It's an instant knowing. You don't have to question it. I just knew I was there. And actually, my dad was there, but he showed up as a jet black Australian Aborigine. So I like knew it was my dad, but he didn't look like him at all. And in fact, it was like the ancestral lineage kind of idea of my dad. Um, and we encountered this big flightless bird of prey that you would not want to tussle with on like in the outback. And it had this super thick neck and beak, and it was some sort of archetypal energy as well. And there was this moment of like mutual respect of each other's power, because it was looking down on us like this, and we saw the power, like it could kill us if it wanted to, but it also respected us because humans were little vicious creatures. So that turned out to be a precognition dream, because about 2 to 3 months later, and I did some research on this right afterwards. It's like, are there any crazy flightless birds? I knew it was true. After the dream, it was like, I know that thing existed. And we had these interactions 60,000 years ago in real life. Then a couple of months later, this research paper came out saying, hey, we found this skeleton of a large flightless bird coming out of Australia. It was called like Giganticus or something, right? It was like 7, 8 feet tall. And it looked exactly like the bird I saw in my dream, except the one in my dream was jet black. It wasn't, they colored it some mottled gray or something. So I had this instant knowing about this a few months before this research paper came out that presented evidence for that. And so I think so much of our ancestral knowledge and beyond, going back even before like Homo sapiens, you even go back to the other Homo species, Denisovans and Neanderthals, and even Australopithecus, and even before that, right? Primordial energies. I think all that information is stored within the Schumann resonances. If you're able to enter into coherence with it, and at times, like Earth, Gaia herself wants you to receive certain information. I think she'll give it to you, and that comes to either, let's say, like through a dream state, because you're now operating more at those Schumann resonance frequencies, which is like that very high theta range, 7.83 hertz. That's the type of energy frequency brainwave that gets activated during REM sleep. It's also the type of frequency structure your brain goes to if you take psychedelics. So if you do magic mushrooms, for example, psilocybin, your brainwave structure shifts from beta and alpha down more into theta and delta, but really it strongly activates from around 7 to 9 hertz. So that's one understanding of consciousness with the Schumann resonances. And there's others, but I think that's the one that's really fascinating. I think that's also perhaps an energy that channelers that are actually channeling stuff may be dipping into. If they're able to enter into that resonance with it, then they can, or like if you're scrying the Akashic records, perhaps that's it.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. I love that you bring in the Indigenous here in Australia to where I call home. I mean, part of me has this high level question because, and I don't think we're going to answer it today, but like, I don't know, they've got this energy around Bunjil, the creator, and it's this bird that is the creator, like it's almost like their version of God in some cultures in some ways, like Bunjil, the creator spirit. So I'm wondering if you met Bunjil. I don't know, but Bunjil, from what I understand, has wings. It's like the great eagle. But it's interesting because they call it here, the spirituality for the Indigenous is very much called the dream time. It's called the dreaming. Like even the flag that they have, the Indigenous is like this red earth. It's the sun, but then it's the night sky, right? And I mean, just something to riff on. And we can talk about this later. But something that I remember when I was working with some Indigenous elders here, and I was having this conversation, and it was night. We were looking up at the stars. And the elder goes, "So young fella, when you look sky, what you see?" And I was like, I see all these stars, and I'm aware that, you know, some of them have already passed, like they're quarks, you know, like they've already passed away, and I'm still receiving the light millions of years later, like trying to be intellectual and smart, right? And he goes, "Yeah, that's all well and good effectively." And he goes, "You see how you notice you Western, like you think shiny, like you see the shiny objects. For us, we're looking at the spaces in between. Yeah. And it literally just turned the 2D night sky into this 3D experience as he shared that. It's like you're just looking at the surface. Like there's this whole depth between these points of light. And I mean, it was just a piece of wisdom that has stayed with me ever since then. And he sort of unlocked something within me in that moment, because I was like, oh, as I'm looking up at the night sky, it's also beneath me on the other side of the earth as well. And like this whole space monkeys thing just dropped in for me, orbiting on this satellite. But the key thing in there is, I like bringing in there is studying a little bit of Buddhism recently through the podcast. They talk about, like, let's say the medicine Buddha. Let's just bring that into the frame for a second. At some point, there wasn't a medicine Buddha. Now, it's a great question in terms of, was there always a medicine Buddha? And then we learnt to connect into it and then started praying to it. And then as sigil awareness, because they gave it sort of totems to hold in its hand, to sit in a lotus, like all these things, we start to charge up the energy of the medicine Buddha. And then decades down the line, people can actually, I don't want to put it this way, but scrape some of the energy off the top and channel that healing for themselves. Because some people have put their intentions into the sigil can then downstream. Now, was it always there in the field, or did we create it with our collective intentions? Like, this is, a fascinating topic. But then when you dive back into, like you said, 60,000 years ago in your dream, I mean, the indigenous here in Australia, they've got these, they call them the song lines, but I know you've said them as dragon lines, ley lines. And I just find it really fascinating just picturing a world which isn't, 21st century, even just a few thousand years ago. Like they're walking along and there's these, they can potentially see, I mean, coherence is probably a good conversation to have here. They can potentially see these song lines and plug in, download information as required as the wisdom, and then even just plug information back in. I mean, I don't know if that's possible, but it's fascinating for the mind to consider.
Yeah, I mean, our consciousness is a variety of inputs coming in one basic understanding. And we have, let's say, 1,000 inputs coming in. It's much more than this, but to keep it simple, our brain might be constructing, and our body may be constructing reality from like 10 of those or something. Like there's so much that it's just not actively present into our reality, and you can shift that focus depending on what you're doing. For example, like yoga nidra, if you lay down and all of a sudden, the nice girl speaking in your ear saying, feel your thumb, now your right index finger, and you'll be like, your consciousness will center over that part, and you shift from one arm, now you're in the elbow, the shoulder, heart space, you go to the other side. Like you're no longer focused here in the brain like most people, or a lot of people say heart focus, which is beautiful, but you can shift that around wherever you want. You go down to your pinky toe. Pinky toe has a lot to say. So it's true. So that is like this more fluid, all those inputs are constantly coming in, but how often are we aware of them, or consciously recognizing them? Maybe a very simple example is just like, how often do you speak to your heart and say, thank you, heart, for beating for me every single second, every single day? Like that's a really important thing to do. Like, thank you, heart. And like reciprocally sending that consciousness to it. So if we are fundamentally receiving all this energy, because it is interacting with us across the entire light spectrum. There's other things too, quantum understandings. And again, we have these overlaps with the Schumann resonances in our brain, our biofield, our heart rhythms. But is it being constructed into something that we can see ourselves? Like what we see in our reality is like the one metaphor is that it is the operating system over all the code, right? And so you have all these zeros and ones. You also have the hardware, but we're using Windows or Mac OS. It's basically the same with our reality. And who's to say, like, they definitely didn't run Windows 10 back then. They had something way better. So I think that, yeah, it's very possible. And like, if you don't have written records, then how do you leave signs of that? I mean, we see interesting carvings and paintings, and we try to have these explanations for them, but sometimes there's no good way to understand it. There's a whole bunch of objects, which if we dropped in the ground and they exhumed like 3,000 years later, they'd be like, what the heck is this? It makes no sense. Take any part on a bike. right? And you like just take one cog on a bike and take the rest away. They're like, what the heck is this for? They're gonna have no understanding. So same thing. So our archaeology is really limited, but it's a really interesting idea that you bring up, seeing these lines, be able to navigate with them. I don't say it's not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder where, with technology, where it's headed, what's going to be possible as we step into, and maybe this is where some of the astrology comes in for you now, in terms of we're stepping out of the age of Pisces from a water sign into this more age of Aquarius with an air sign, and what's happening at this moment in terms of what the future of this sort of looks like.
Yeah, there's a lot of people talking about this, and we're going to continue, of course, talking about it. We're seeing a shift into more volatile weather, it seems, on our planet. That's air element, and air in general is very mutable and can change quickly. Um, Air can be stable. I mean, some places are kind of like always have a wind blowing, like Bodega Bay in California. It's like always windy coming off the Pacific going inland. But in general, air is more fluid, dynamic. And so I think that's going to be characteristic of the energies and just our society and the planet at large. And this age of Aquarius shift is really interesting. When does that occur is a big question that's not answered. We know the rate of precession now. There's a big open question as to what is causing precession. I talk about this actually a lot in my Planetary Resonances e-course, because the current understanding for the mainstream is that Earth has this wobble in its tilt axis. So it's always wobbling, and this accounts for the equinoxes moving through the zodiac. You know, there's a slight shift, 1 degree every 72 years through the zodiac of now this constellation is on the horizon, housing the sun during the equinox. And then you have, of course, a different constellation for solstice and the September equinox and then the winter solstice. But we see everything has like an elliptical orbit in space. And so these equations for the wobble of the Earth are really complex, and they're always updating them, and they have like all these variables. And in general, if we go by like the work of Buckminster Fuller and a lot of other people, you know, the simpler something is, the more likely it is to be true. And if you have to add all these constants in, you're trying to make something fit that fundamentally isn't the answer.
Bridging the gaps. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think Earth has this wobble, and there's some evidence because we have a moon and its lunar rotation around the Earth, quite strong evidence that confirms that. But if the entire sun was traveling on an elliptical orbit as it moved through the galaxy, that could explain the precession of the equinoxes. And so there would be a period in time where that precession would be fastest, because in an elliptical orbit, sometimes your orbital velocity is faster, other times it's slower. For example, Sedna, the transit-joining dwarf object, which has a about 11,400 year cycle in its orbit around the sun, it's traveling at its fastest right now because it's getting close to perihelion, which is 2076. That's a big shift that we're going through. That's also happening in Gemini, more air energy. But when it's all the way out at the very far edge of its elliptical orbit, it's moving the slowest. So it's moving through the zodiac super slowly. And so precession probably isn't fixed in its speed. Right now they're measuring at 72, but you go back in time and it was moving at different velocities. Basically, the degree change per year was less. And so they've been like updating this. And people kind of discount some of these really early measurements from like 2,000 years ago, 2,200 years ago, or even from the Greeks, perhaps even from the Babylonians. They may have known about it as well. But I think there's ample evidence that precession is shifting, which means that the conventional model of precession, 72 years for a degree, would put Age of Aquarius starting in like 2050 AD or 2500 AD. But it seems to be accelerating, which means that Age of Aquarius would start sooner. And so I'm kind of laying out the groundwork of when I think that's going to happen. And we see right now Pluto going through Aquarius, kind of waking all those energies up. And I think what's very much going to be an end to the age of Pisces will when Pluto goes through Pisces next. And that's in 2044 to about 2060 something, maybe like 2067 or 2068. And that's right before 2100, which based on my model precession is when all of a sudden Aquarius is going to be housing the sun during the equinox, the March equinox. So what better way to herald the end of the age of Pisces than Pluto moving through Pisces, where it won't be again for another 250 years. So I think we're in this very significant shift as it relates to going from Pisces to Aquarius with the age. And we're going into Saturnian energies away from these more nebulous domains, moving into this more kind of logical, but also very open and spiritual dimension, like technologically based too. The male expression of Saturn, or he's a little bit more of a maverick, and also now the modern ruler is Uranus, and he's the planet or the archetypal energy god, whatever you want to say, of change and electricity and technology. So consciousness, they're very Promethean, gave fire to man. So I think what we have coming up is really, really significant. It's going to take time to play out. Some people are already receiving shifts, but people are always receiving shifts and updates and things. And how that relates to the Earth geophysically is going to be interesting. How that relates to things like the Schumann resonances, perhaps that's going to unlock certain information in those energy fields and make them accessible for the first time in a long time. Because they've been around again for millions of years. So they've been through a lot of Age of Aquariuses, right? They've been through a lot of these different energies. And I can imagine, the holographic interference pattern that is always there, changing with this is going to open up new doors and make things accessible to people that hasn't been accessible before, and how that influences us. And it's going to be fast. There's going to be sudden shifts that are unpredicted, but going to be for our benefit overall. I think I'm really excited. I hope that answers your question.
It really does. And one of the questions I had was, which I think you started to answer, is does each, because Earth has Schumann, the Schumann resonance, but does each, because the program's called, sorry, refresh me, it's called Planetary Resonances, right? So does each planet and celestial body have its own Schumann resonance, or actually is a Schumann resonance, permeating through the entire, as one? Yeah, can you describe that a little bit to me?
Well, I mean, technically, Schumann resonances exist on other planets because, again, what we call Schumann resonances are just the specific frequencies of light that are resonant with Earth. But, at times those frequencies are going to be produced elsewhere. But are they resonant, right? What does resonance mean? It means that there's this energy conservation because they don't die out, right? And you can get things resonating together, just like you can meet someone you've never met before, but you feel like you've been best friends for a decade because you just have this innate resonance with them, right? We're both Virgos. Our channels are both at the exact same subscriber count right now. We're meeting for this conversation at this moment in time. Temporary or long-term resonance is one of them, right?
Definitely feel like I'm resonating with you right now.
Yeah. And so, but for there to be these standing waves of energy, you need there to be a flow of energy globally. And so they theorize that there's certain resonances to the moon Titan because there's a very thick atmosphere there. And there's probably resonances for Venus because Venus has a thick atmosphere and she's very hot. So there's a lot of storm activity there as well. And there's certainly probably some very low frequency resonances to Jupiter because Jupiter is a storm planet. Tons of lightning strikes occurring all the time. It's much colder than Earth, but it has massive lightning strikes you can actually see from space. We have a probe that's flying around Jupiter called Juno, and sometimes we'll see these green flashes of light with the imagery from Juno, and basically a massive super bolt blasted off, and that's producing, lightning is the same basically across the universe. It's just the scale. So that's producing certain frequencies of light, which probably have a natural Jupiterian resonance, which I imagine is very low frequency because Jupiter is very large. So you could calculate that out. I'm not sure anyone has. It wouldn't be too difficult to calculate out, at least for the foundational mode. Because the foundational mode of the Schumann resonance on average here on Earth is 7.83 hertz. It varies though, but about 7.8 hertz. But if you do this, the circumference of the Earth is 40,000 kilometers, and you do the speed of light at 300,000 kilometers per second, you get a frequency of 7.5. That's smack dab in that range. The Schumann resonance at times is 7.5 hertz. Slightly higher because of some other like atmospheric characteristics that we have. So you could do what's the circumference of Jupiter. I mean, we could pull it up now. We're not going to, but you could. What's the circumference of Jupiter? You take this the average, the velocity of light, and we could calculate the Jupiterian foundational mode. It may not exist, but all the gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, I'd imagine would have a foundational resonance to them. And then any planet that has a significant atmosphere and a flow of energy globally probably has one. I don't think Mars would probably have one. Mercury may have one. It has a magnetic field. It's about 1% the strength of ours, but it may have a mercurial resonance. Maybe a much higher frequency because it's much smaller. It's hard to say. The moon doesn't have an atmosphere. It's not going to have one.
And is that why Mars wouldn't have one? Because it doesn't have an atmosphere?
I think that's a pretty important component, having an ionosphere, that waveguide to trap it and help it resonate. But planetary resonances, yeah, so there's different types of planetary resonances. Our language is the limit here because these are planetary resonances, but planetary resonances are also the synodic cycles of the planets meeting in space with conjunctions, oppositions, trines, things of this nature. So a better term for that in some aspect would be like a synodic cycle. But a good example of a planetary resonance, this is also a scientific term for this, is Neptune and Pluto, which have a 3-to-2 resonance. Neptune does 3 orbits around the sun for every 2 that Pluto does. And so that's a planetary resonance. There's a whole bunch of things that have planetary resonances with Jupiter, with Saturn. And so there's certain objects there, like Chiron is one of those. It's in a planetary resonance with Jupiter and Saturn. So the Venus has her planetary resonance with Earth. It's 8-to-13. Venus has 13 orbits around the sun. We do 13. That's Fibonacci numbers. So you actually get Fibonacci scaling across the universe pretty nicely. It's interesting. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Sacred geometry basically baked throughout the entire solar system.
Yeah, I mean, it starts looking like a matrix really fast when you get into that. I mean, there's also this like question that I've been sort of harboring in the back of my head, and actually started with my wife asking me this question as I started studying more astrology through the podcast. And she was like, who decided that Mars was passion, energy, war? Who decided that Venus was peace, feminine? Like, these archetypical sort of resonances and frequencies that these celestial bodies carry. And I've asked a few astrologers, like noteworthy astrologers, and their responses have kind of tended towards this. They've ended up at I don't know, but they've always kind of consistently pointed to there's consistency amongst various fields of study towards astrology, astronomy, Vedic, Hindu, like Western, like, and they seem to arrive at the same point again and again. So there must be some sort of archetypical energy behind there. In your awareness, anything, in your awareness rattling around about it?
Yeah, well, that's interesting you bring that up because I think it provides an opportunity to speak about something. I think, there's some of the oldest information that we have on astrology goes back to the Romans, who basically just copied down what the Greeks said in many ways. But like actual writings, I have one of the books, I don't remember the author's name, it's like Velen or something like that, but he wrote about all these crazy things. If you have Mars in this placement and Jupiter in this aspect in your 3rd house, you're going to be murdered. Like it's really, really like faded stuff. And so that goes to show you. And there is some crazy stuff where astrologers predicted like key events, like very closely based on like natal transits and the archetypal expressions of those signs and the planets and more. So there's, some rabbit holes there, but a good book to read on that more would be The Astrology Fate by Liz Green. But archetypes evolve. We're not stuck with these archetypes. I think some of the archetypes just go down to like the color of the planets. Like Mars shows up red in the night sky. And just in general, not a critique, but a suggestion. And I'm new to this myself. I'm so new to this. So this is also just advice for myself, is that we need to be going out and looking at the night sky more. I think a lot of modern astrologers get really just caught in looking at charts, and there's a tremendous amount of awesome stuff there. And some of the predictions I've seen are incredible. But like right now, for example, in April, we have a really nice equilateral trine in the night sky between Sirius, Jupiter, and Mars. And it breaks this April because Mars is starting to get faster and faster, and it's going to break that equilateral triangle. But Sirius, 8.6 light years away, very bright white light. Jupiter shows up yellow. Mars shows up red. So you can kind of get a sense of the energies in that aspect, even just from like the colors and how long they take to do a cycle, because Jupiter's 12 years. And so we see this connection with 12 across like the universe with a variety of things. There's 12 signs of the zodiac. So if the zodiac is representative of like the cycle and progression of consciousness, and Jupiter's connected to that, then he's very much like this guide, this benevolent figure on that journey. So just some of these really base connections have shaped the foundation of these archetypes, but that can evolve. Mars doesn't have to be, malefic bad guy all the time. So I view this trine that's in the sky as a good thing. I think it's a really nice, equilateral, very harmonic. But I haven't heard anyone talk about that. But you go out there, that's what you see. An ancient person, our Australian Aborigine, they wouldn't probably know that there's a trine configuration where Mars is below them to the horizon like this, and Jupiter's down there, and Saturn is up there like that. I'm not going to put it past them, but if you actually can see a triangle in the sky as it's setting after the sun sets, you're going to probably put a lot of weight on that. So this is very much like an ancient Sumerian understanding, and even like a Paleolithic understanding of astrology that I think is probably some of the most foundational for these archetypes that really aren't discussed much now. And it's accessible to everyone, which I love, because you can just go out there, even in a place that's a lot of light pollution. You're going to see Jupiter, you're going to see Sirius, and you'll probably will see Mars. I mean, I see it here in San Diego. And so anyone can connect to those energies.
Inspired souls, lumen beings, if you're liking this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that like button and join in on the conversation below. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What are you taking away from today's conversation? I mean, Stefan is covering so much ground, such a rich tapestry of, just the different interest points that he carries and fields of study and how they all come together in studying our place in the universe. And what is your biggest takeaway? For me, just feeling into even how centered in geophysics it is entirely a vibrational reality that we live in is just hard to ignore. What is your takeaway from today's conversation? Leave that in the comments. If you've got questions for Stefan, he's very active on socials and YouTube. He's likely going to answer your questions himself. And if you've got any questions you'd like to ask him in the future, leave them in the comments below, and I'd be honored to ask them on your behalf when he comes on next on the podcast. Back to Stefan in today's episode. Part of me wonders with the sort of the Hindu Vedic background, because they studied so much around the planets and the measurements, and also studying and measuring their bodies. And there was like this interrelationship. I don't know enough about it to be able to speak to it. But one of the fascinations I've got as you were describing that is like kind of watching a trine and potentially even just noticing what goes on for yourself emotionally within your center, studying that over the years as a collective science, some of these like studies of astrology. Because one of the pieces I picked up in your work is, yes, you mentioned this earlier, we've got instruments for the Schumann resonance, like you've got, we can measure with these, I don't know if they're electrodes, or I imagine there's something similar to that effect, but we're able to measure. But there was this really beautiful thing when I was studying your work that really dropped in for me. It was like, and those instruments are great, but our body is like the ultimate instrument, and it really landed for me in terms of like, we're consistently feeling these frequencies. We are frequency, like, you know, and I mean, maybe I should just let you take over from this point before I butcher your beautiful words.
Oh, well, I think that studying both of those aspects is really important. If you can drop into how you're feeling and you apply a little bit of maybe Virgo to that and you keep a dream journal or you just have good recall and this type of stuff, it helps you to understand these ebbs and flows better. I mean, I have my dream journal, and during key astrological alignments, I usually get a potentiation of my dreams. There's certain herbs, like for example, lotus flower, like blue lotus flower, really will potentiate like lucid dreams, or just make them more vivid or precognitive. So it helps you connect to that. And the ancient Egyptians, like that's what they were using it for. They were having fun with blue lotus flower because it's an aphrodisiac, but then they also had the priests had like these like rooms that they would sleep in that was like exposed to the stars. And it's basically in all the hieroglyphic iconography all across Egypt is the blue lotus flower is representative of life itself. Like the creation of the universe was basically in a lotus flower. So you can use things like that to tap into some of these energies, and just keeping track of all this loosely or analytically, whatever, helps you understand like how this is all working. And you don't need to necessarily have some measurement device over there. Though I think it's good to have that too, because it provides a little bit of a check on our ego. Because the ego is always there trying to like get a little bit of a wrap around us. And so I think that it's important to examine both of these as it relates to trying to track these like changes to ourselves and the Schumann resonances, other energy fields on the planet. Sometimes these pulses of energy that occur, not even only on Earth, but across the solar system. May 28th of this year was one of those, because we had 4 big earthquakes, one being the magnitude 7.7 in Myanmar, Burma. But there's also a huge explosion on the sun at the same time. And we had the partial solar eclipse the day after on the 29th. I just talked to my personal trainer. He got married on the 28th of March, just like, a few weeks ago. I was like, bro, you got married on that energy explosion. I don't know what that means, but you're in it, bro. He's like, really? Like that all happened on the 28th? So he was participating with that, whether he knew it or not.
Okay, so let's dive into solar flares a little bit, because people seem to want to tune in around this conversation. You carry it really interestingly, because not only, as you've described, are these energetic frequencies. Okay, so what is a solar flare? Maybe let's just start there.
Yeah, basically, it's just an explosion on the sun. And there's some competing ideas. I don't see them having to be competing. Something is based on magnetic fields connecting together. It's called magnetic reconnection. Some plasma physicists think that magnetic reconnection isn't something that we need to evoke to understand them. It's just literally like plasma leaving the sun. But regardless, it's a big explosion on the sun. And you get this acceleration of particles that occurs as a result. There's like this compression and then this acceleration of particles that produces a lot of light. And so we can actually see these solar flares if we measure them with like a telescope. The first solar flare that was ever seen was actually the Carrington event, 1859. The really big solar storm that hit us. Carrington is looking through his telescope, and all of a sudden he's like, holy crap, like there's like this massive flash of light right now. And he actually stepped away when it reaches peak amplitude, because he was like trying to get someone else to come over or get a logbook or something like that. And he missed like the peak of that curve. But it's producing more than just visible light. It's also producing radio frequencies. We get these solar bursts in the radio frequency spectrum. This overlaps roughly the same frequency as like Wi-Fi, like 2.8 gigahertz. But there's a whole range of microwave frequencies that the sun emits that are able to reach the surface because of that natural plasma oscillation, and they have a frequency that's able to pass through it. And then there's also higher vibrational light, for example, X-rays, which get absorbed directly into the ionosphere, charge the global electric circuit. So we can see that spike in some of our measurement devices, and that's how we measure solar flares. Like the strength of a solar flare is measured by its X-ray flux. 1 to 8 angstroms, and it scales logarithmically. So if you get a really big spike of X-rays, it's a really big solar flare. But every now and then the sun just shoots off an explosion. It happens more during solar maximum, generally during solar maximum, which we're in right now. And that then can broadcast out to the entire edge of the solar system. If it's a really large, like a merged interaction region is what they're known, a mirror, really large coronal mass ejections, or if there's a sequence of them, can actually broadcast out to the edge of the solar system and even push plasma out beyond the heliosphere, which is like the bubble created by the sun. And we know that because we have our Voyager probes now outside the heliosphere, but still pretty close to it. And they've recorded these increases in plasma oscillation and power that then scientists looked at the data and were like, oh, we had some really big solar storms that, basically exploded off the sun. And based on the transit time, that would be perfectly lining up with this increase in the plasma power and oscillation beyond the edge of the outer heliosphere. So it's like the Schumann resonances in some aspect. We have the Schumann resonances bleeding out to space from the Earth to some degree. There's a natural decay. They're only like 1/100th the strength in the ionosphere that they are at the surface, but we still observe them at some strength bleeding out to space. And these plasma emissions from the sun, from solar flares, these explosions also bleed out beyond the heliosphere and into interstellar space, which is probably also some more unified, collective consciousness, you could say, of the galaxy. Now you start to stray into really fun territory, but like the question is, in my mind, to some degree, is like, what do you do with that, or how do you connect to that, and how do you cultivate these really unique states of consciousness where you're perhaps now communicating or receiving information from like the galactic center or something like that? That's a big exploration of mine as well, rather than just understanding this informationally. And how can we also tune into that? And I think just going out there, like you said with your story, just looking at the stars and even looking into the darkness more so helps you to connect with those and to enter into resonance with them.
Experientially, yeah. I mean, it's fascinating as well because for what I understand from your work is there are biological phenomenon or physical phenomenon that's actually occurring, but then there's almost this data information flow that's also coming in your interpretation through these phenomenons, like it's all vibration. And I mean, something that really stuck with me was, let's say the sun has a solar flare, it comes down to the earth. I mean, there's something that's happening to the human being on one regard, but there's something that's happening to the earth in another regard. And then the earth actually, you put it this way, and the engineer in me loved it, which was, it like reformats the information. It's almost like how it takes in sunlight, puts it in the soil, grows plants, and then we take on that information, but not too dissimilarly. Like the earth takes on the solar flare packets of information, then reprograms them, it reformats it for us to be used in a digestible way as well. Yeah?
Yeah, that's what it seems, because, I mean, if you were out there in space like this, right, and a solar flare hit you, you wouldn't be having fun. I'm sure some of our collective audience would like to do that, right? To just be like, I'm here for the energy. But it would not work out well for you. Let's just put it like that. I mean, there's astronauts in space, sometimes during like a coronal mass ejection, like a solar storm impact, they will actually see flashes of light because some of these high energy particles are getting through the shielding and actually hitting their retina and generating a flash of light through that molecular hit. So these things, it's radiation. You have enough DNA strand breaks, it's not fun. So yeah, you don't want to be out there like taking the energy like this, at least in our current form with our fleshy bodies. But if you take that energy and the earth, absorbs it and then turns it into a very weak energy field like the Schumann resonances, which is able to interact with us through electrons and also through DNA in a very gentle way. They've been shown to be health. They promote health. Having stronger Schumann resonances in general helps you have more stable biorhythms in your circadian rhythm. And, I think there's a strong connection to longevity with them. because the animals that live the longest are ones that are constantly in contact with the earth. They're always grounded and they're always connected to Schumann resonances. Sea turtles, whales, barnacles, naked mole rats, right? Naked mole rats live underground without any fur insulation. They live 10 times longer than a normal rat. So that's just like a little side thing. But I think the earth is taking these energies in and reformatting them into a way that we can then work with like condusively, and not in this like you just get burnt to a crisp and perhaps your plasma body is now part of the the interplanetary plasma. That's an idea that I have, is that if you get struck by lightning and die, perhaps that's like your way of immediately ascending to the plasma reality, right? Like that could be a way to immediately become part of the plasma reality, which is maybe where like the gods of Olympus are and everything of that nature. It's an interesting idea where your consciousness goes after death, right? And I think the sun probably has a collective of consciousnesses that exist there. Supposedly, there's like these mantis creatures on the sun. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about this. Yeah, we'll only touch this for a second, but I've had dreams of these things without even really knowing about this first. And they're supposedly like the denizens of the sun. And so there's, for example, what's his name? Alan Leo, an astrologer from like the early 1900s. He talks about them. And so it's just like an interesting little rabbit hole for some people to explore. But there's probably like conscious entities existing all throughout the solar system, at every single planet, at the sun. And we think we're alone, but in reality we're not, because they're in these higher vibrational forms of life. And perhaps, going like this at the solar flare would be one way to quickly join them. But you may not have experience with holding that sort of consciousness at that high vibrational resonance. Think about when you're in a dream, how difficult it is for the dream to be stable, especially if you go lucid. You may be lucid in your dream only for like 2 minutes before all of a sudden it fades away. I think one idea that I have, off topic, but not really, one idea that I have is that, we were babies at one point and now we're grown up, or we're growing up. But in reality, we are still like the embryo or the fetus or the baby of our plasma body and our astral body. And so there's just constantly, we are in some sort of fetal stage at some point. Maybe the plasma body is some sort of fetal stage for more causal reality. It's just an idea generation landscape of reality. This kind of works on the ideas of Itzhak Bentov. So I think there's the Schumann resonances are like a portal into all of this, basically. Solar activity and everything's a portal in all this. We can stick super material, which is cool, but we can also have some fun with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating to tune into. We've got to scratch the itch on plasma deeper. I mean, because plasma is this fourth state in some ways, right? Where things exist. We've got solid, we've got gas, we've got liquid, but then there's plasma. And I mean, tuning into your work a little bit, I think my fascinations around sort of that conversation we were having before around, Buddhism and, sigil and, healing, and how that sort of, our intentions charge something up and then we receive the blessings of charged up intentions. I mean, it's almost somewhat more grounded in your worldview when you start approaching into this field of plasma, and potentially it's got consciousness. I mean, that's blowing me away. Can you describe what you're getting into when you're having those conversations on your channel?
Yeah. Yeah, two kind of different things, but I don't think they are. Like, if people collectively believe in something and keep feeding that energy into it, like this medicine Buddha that you're speaking of, then, and this is also leaning into the work of Itzhak Bentov, he believed, and I also believe this, that eventually creates a level of consciousness, and that can even then create an entity. And the more that's fed into, the greater that consciousness can grow. And in some aspects, we're doing that as well with our audience. We're creating our audience this like larger consciousness field and it's growing and growing. We're kind of at the leading edge of that, but everyone that's a part of that community is taking part in that in some way. And so people, for going back to Paleolithic man, right? Not even Neolithic or like recent, the Greeks or the Romans, that's also new in the big perspective. Like going all the way back to Australopithecus, before that, like people saw Jupiter because it's one of the brightest objects in the sky. They've been speaking to Jupiter, having conversations, just receiving like insights while looking at Jupiter. How many people have been looking at the moon, right? And just seeing the light and energy of the moon. So we've created these, it seems to me that we've created these conscious entity thought forms. Maybe we didn't create them, but we helped feed them as well. Lots of things are creating this. The panther in the Amazon forest is also looking up at the moon every now and then. The wolves are howling at the moon. We're not the only ones, right? So we have these like conscious entities that exist, that we communicate with, that we feed, but we also receive from. And they seem to have a representation in our manifest reality as well, our 3D reality, because we actually see a planet Jupiter. We actually see a moon. We actually see the planet Mercury, the star Sirius, whatever. But then, it goes beyond that because Jupiter is emitting all this plasma out into space itself. It's called Jovian flux. It's emitting a whole bunch of radio frequencies out into space. You can even tune your radio to that if you get clear reception sometimes. Before there was a lot of this noise, you could sometimes just be driving down the highway in Ohio and you'll get some weird radio signal from Jupiter because it's able to cut through the ionosphere as well. And so there's plasma is kind of like a way to understand this all, because plasma generates these frequencies, whereas solid doesn't. You're not getting frequencies generated from glass. Now you have the piezoelectric effect with quartz. You can apply stress to quartz and it has a crystalline structure and it'll emit some electric signal because some of those electrons get popped out of the lattice. And then, with water in this cup, it has hydrogen bonds. So it also has crystal structures to it as well. Quantum properties. It's really quite fascinating. And then air has its own structure and molecular dynamics. Plasma is even more vibrational. And the atoms start to split apart even. Electrons fly off from the nucleus, the proton, whatever. But they are still able to maintain these really complex organized structures that have self-coherence and can form these, what you could say, crystalline bonds. So plasma, even though it's extremely highly vibrational, there's still a level of self-organization that exists with it. And so solids have this because, again, like the crystal bonds of quartz. Water, which is a liquid, has this. Air has this. But as you go up in energy, you don't necessarily lose structure. And that seems to be an important component of having organized consciousness, not just like pure primordial chaos consciousness, which is like the potential of everything. That 0 point energy, which we're going into with Saturn and Neptune conjuncting at 0 degrees of Aries on February 20th, 2026. Like we're entering into that energy, which is why this year has been so wild. But plasma has this ability like self-order, and I think it's probably the next level of our consciousness that we go to. If we finally are done with the earthly realm, we probably ascend to like the plasma realm. Maybe we have to do a lot of trips around the sun to do that. A lot of lifetimes, maybe just one earthly life. It's probably different for everybody. But I think at some point we learn to master our control over the astral realm, where you can just create things out of nothing, right? Because plasma, all of a sudden, you can just pull this stuff together and boom, you have something effectively. So
yeah, I mean, it's fascinating as well. Part of me has always believed that we're not alone in this universe as human beings. But in terms of whether we make contact, see other beings, I'm not really sure about any of that. But as I started to tune into vibratory sort of awareness, I mean, I was this weird guy, right? So even when I was working on construction sites, I'd sort of play this. There's this YouTube video where it starts at 0 hertz and it taps out at 25,000. Yeah.
Mm.
And you literally just play the audio and you play it to someone like, just super blokey, and you're just like, Howie, listen to this. And it's like, I can't hear anything. And it's like, yeah, you can't just yet. And then it starts going, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
And then it keeps going. And then I'm like, and then you just goes, what are you trying to say? And I was like, well, you only heard from here to here, right? But it's still playing sound at those two other ends of the spectrum. And that's how your Wi-Fi is operating. That's how radio signals are working. That's how you're catching TV. That's how you're talking to your wife when you call home. Like, what's to say, like, what is going on as a different state of matter almost outside of where we currently can perceive and visually see/hear. And I remember it was just such a grounded way to blow someone's mind open to sort of just approach that. And then I started to recognize that potentially, and maybe, and I'm, I start to lose the ground in this space, but maybe that's where angels exist. I don't know, but maybe this is where, there are other influences supporting, guiding, I don't know enough to be able to like actively say, because I've only got my 5 senses. I mean, we do tune in with intuition and stuff, but yeah, I mean, your contemplations around plasma totally fascinate me. Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't see why it doesn't make sense. It doesn't require a big leap of faith either, right?
Yeah.
It really doesn't.
I was going to scratch the itch on, you mentioned, and we were discussing this a little bit throughout the podcast, but as you've said, 2025, 2026, there's this real chaotic energy afoot. Did you have some bandwidth to sort of explain what's going on from your awareness?
Yeah, I think we just don't exactly know how it's going to express itself, and it's expressing itself already in a variety of unique and eccentric ways. And I think it's really going to be like, let's just kind of stay grounded during this and be willing to like go with the rhythms and the waves. So that's why, for example, I mean, I could have some people comment on my channel and they're like, dude, just stick to the science. Like, you could be such a bigger channel if you just like did science reports saying, hey, we found this new mammoth, or check this thing out with lightning, whatever. And it's like, but there's so much more to that. And this channel's, it's always just been about what I find interesting, and hopefully people resonate with that. It's been my own personal exploration. And so I often at the end of my videos also do like sound healings using like crystal bowls. And, some people have some really awesome setups and they got 20 bowls. They play them for like 4 hours and it's wild, right? Some people do some crazy stuff with that. I have 3 bowls. I have my gong I can put up and a couple other things. But if I can help out and there's a lot of ways of understanding things. If you can do the scientific report, but then also like, can you actually feel this yourself? I think that's really important. So it seems to me, because, you probably had 1 billion people talk about 2025 and 2026 on your channel. So I could talk about it too, but I think that these energies really, really benefit from connecting to source and spirit in that way, because I've had so many people comment saying, you just playing your bowl or this or that was like all of a sudden completely transmuted my energy field, and the headache I had just completely vanished. And it just helps to seem to balance people's energy in their biofields, and it can be very simple. And so there's this chaos potential energy, which is like how the universe is created. Then there's also just chaos energy that doesn't serve us. Like master meditators have these clear, coherent peaks in their brain waves. The common structure is that their theta waves, 4 to 8 hertz, have a clear sinusoidal rhythm. Then also their beta waves around 20 hertz will also have a rhythm. So there's this frequency stacking, low frequency and high frequency. But you want this coherence. Chaos, in some aspects, is the opposite of coherence. You can have coherence emerge from chaos, but you can also just have noise and erratic, signals that don't actually convey any information. It can just be like 1,000 people all just talking over each other at once. Like, you're not going to get anything from that. So there's these different expressions of chaos. There's the foundational, like, quantum expression, and what that's going to manifest, I think, depends on how we work with our own chaos energies. And so if we bring in coherence to ourselves individually and also collectively, I think that's going to manifest higher expressions from this quantum field of potential that will be beneficial, more beneficial to us overall, and expedite, you could say, this consciousness evolution journey that we're on together as a planet. So I think it's really important to not only speak about these things, but to also do the things as well. Because if people are hearing it from you, then naturally a lot of people are like, okay, well, like, let's get on with it. What's the next thing that we can do to do it? And we are trapped a little bit right now in like this just information replay. Like, okay, I heard your podcast with some astrologer on 2025 and 2026. And then I listened to another podcast with someone else talking about 2025 and 2026. And then I listened to that one. I'm a complete master as to the archetypal energies of 2025 and 2026. It's like, okay, let's actually work with that now. You got enough information. Going from 98% to 99% probably isn't going to do anything now in terms of like, we don't even know how it's going to express itself yet in the long term. Like the actual final expression of that, we don't know. But doing something to actually experience that and to format that ourselves, I think, is really important. And we are all technically doing that already, but I think working with some of these things, bringing in that balance and coherence is a really important thing as well. So I just wanted to kind of vouch for that, to speak on that, how important it is to do that.
Yeah, I genuinely appreciate that. And that was one of my questions that I had for you today was distortion, coherence, resonance. I've got these three words sort of rattling around in my field as I'm talking to you. I'm hoping you play your bowl for us towards the end, if that's okay. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to sort of, I know, just get neural about it for just a moment, like, especially 21st century living, we're talking about Schumann resonances. I mean, in some of your work, like stuff's been happening 14,000, like thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But it does seem like there are some distortions at the field at the moment. I mean, when I look at it and I feel into your work, there's always this reassurance is like we're being held by Mother Earth and she's got us. And, even the sort of things that we sort of see as sort of like blips, I'm sure over time will iron out the kinks in some ways. But it does seem like there's a lot of distortion. I mean, 21st century, a lot of electromagnetic frequencies, a lot of like what is going on in the world right now, a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos. And I wanted to just sort of take some time in terms of tuning in from a space of what can we do about it? Like what can we do about distortion? What is the importance of coherence? How do we drop into greater levels of resonance? Yeah.
Distortion is an interesting word because, like we're creating, you could say, distortion amongst our environment with all the electromagnetic radiation, electrosmog, electropollution. A good example of that is how the FCC is only allowed a pretty narrow slice of the radio frequency spectrum for Wi-Fi. And so there's different channels. So channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way like 12 or something, right? Of course, we also have 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz. But one of the common troubleshooting things is if you're in a crowded, busy area with your Wi-Fi, people say, hey, go into your admin panel and change the channel and see if that improves things, because most routers are set to channel 1. If everyone's running at the same frequency, then it's hard to get your specific signal amongst them. So you slightly shift your frequency, maybe from 2.4 to 2.403 hertz, right? There's a range that the FCC is allowed, but it's very, very narrow. But we've put a whole bunch of that out there effectively across also the military frequencies, the government frequencies, regular AM, FM radio. Now we have satellites beaming stuff down to us all the time. So that's in general distorting the natural fields. But when I hear the word distortion, I also think of like, how are we distorting information that we're receiving? and how is that being shared collectively? And so, I mean, we talked about this offline. I 100% believe in channeling. I think probably 95% of channeling is actually channeling distortions in the field and things that people have heard. And maybe my number is totally wrong. I don't know. But it seems to me, this is just me. Seems to me it's about 95%. And if you are consuming certain information, right, and it enters into your consciousness and starts to get baked into your subconscious, and then you go into that channeling state where now you're accessing your subconscious, I think a lot of that information is going to pop up. Because 6 hours ago, you watched a video on how the world's going to end or something, right? The magnetic field is flipping. It's guess what? Like, we actually don't have good geologic evidence for the magnetic field flipping. But we people ourselves, if they're not in their highest spiritual alignment, can distort certain facts or just observations for their own benefit. We know that people lie. Unfortunately, we're not on a planet where people don't lie anymore. Some people do their best to always tell the truth. I'm one of those people, but like, you can't even believe someone that says that because they could be lying, right? So we know that sort of frequency, and it gets complicated, but we have to recognize that some people fundamentally have no problem lying straight to your face, right? It's a real problem. And so they create these distortions, and they'll do it. And you have to be very, very like, it's your own personal responsibility to be able to tune out, to decipher and like recognize that distortion. But we have a responsibility to, for those that do recognize the distortion, to make sure that we put in the coherent energy to fix that. So that's why, I mean, just an example on that topic of the magnetic field, that's why I have this video playlist on Earth's magnetic field. That's like 5 hours now of content. And I released my magnetic guide, which before was like an e-course. It cost like $6 or something, but I made it free to get that information out there. Because like, as someone that's studied into this and still am studying into it, so I leave myself open to things, right? I don't know everything, but based on my research, there's nothing to worry about in the upcoming 5, 10, 50, 100 years as it relates to like the magnetic field suddenly flipping or something. And so because I recognize that, I take upon that responsibility. And I think if we all take upon the responsibility in the areas of our own expertise to the best of our ability, then we can help clear that distortion. And that will also probably reflect across our external environment, and maybe we'll be much better at mining these external frequencies that exist, like, you know, all the electro smog and pollution. But, you know, distortion is just such an interesting word because we see distortion in a multitude of domains. But where's that stemming from? Is it all stemming from like one source? Is that distortion in our information? Like if the astrology right now, Jupiter's in Gemini. And so he's in his fall right now. Gemini is all about information. He's doing his best. He's expanding informational access. But we see all these garbage AI videos. There was one I saw recently. Someone sent it to me. The video was like that, you know, physicists in the Bay Area turned on a quantum computer and it altered Earth's magnetic field. And I didn't find any news article that referenced that. They didn't actually show any of the data showing this change in Earth's magnetic field. Basically, someone just put a prompt into AI saying, make a video about, you know, quantum physics and Earth's magnetic field, and it just spit out some answer. That person had no problem creating distortion. But is that all manifesting from like some deeper quantum foundational level? And how do we like get to the root of that and solve that? I think that means we go internally. I think that means we find our own distortion, solve that, and it will then reflect out across the universe. And so distortions to the Schumann resonances, these anomalies sometimes that we see, perhaps they're like a purging of that. You know, it's a big open question.
Inspired Souls, as Stefan is alluding to, everything is vibration, and he's talking a lot about EMF and the electromagnetic frequencies, and underlying all of that, the importance of how important it is to ground. At this particular time, Inspired Evolution is proud to be partnered with earthing.com. We did an amazing conversation with the founder, Clint Ober, here on the podcast. Since then, we've partnered to bring you products that can help you ground via earthing.com for 10% off. So if you use the link below, and type in the discount code INSPIRED. We'll put that everything in the show notes below. If you use that link and make your way over to the website, you get 10% off everything on their website. My favorite product, one of them is the grounding mat here that I've got in the studio. There's a lot of studio lights and a lot of electron flow and stuff like that. So I'm making sure that there's a grounding mat to just ground and discharge all of that energy that potentially is being taken on is an absolute blessing. And also having one, touch wood, in the bed at night. You're going to sleep for 8 hours. Hopefully you're getting 8 hours. If you're going to sleep for 8 hours, even if you're sleeping for 6, right? Making sure that you've got the grounding mat is super helpful because you ground while you sleep. And so much of that discharge of electrons and ions is just so helpful to get that regulated in your system. The way Clint put it in the podcast when he was on, electron is, there's that sort of fire frequency, and, when it hits your body and it accumulates up rubber soles, all throughout the day, not grounding, that's what is the source of inflammation. So that's flame, inflammation, fire. Yeah, just allowing all of that to discharge helps regulate your nervous system. It's actively healing when it comes to a vibratory sense for your body. So once again, use the link below, make your way over to earthing.com, use the discount code INSPIRED, and get yourself 10% off on anything. Part 2 of the question still stands, Brother Bear. How do we then navigate ourselves through this time?
I think that's where intuition really comes in, and feeling resonance. Like, you can get caught up in something because it's exciting or something, but there may be a little part of you that's like, hey, that's not something you should do. That's basically like an addiction, right? Addictions are very much like that. There's always going to be some part of you that's saying, like, you shouldn't be doing this, but you keep doing it until you can overcome that. And that means honoring that fuller expression of yourself. And developing intuition seems to be one of the best ways to do that. And also just like having a little bit of patience, maybe not jumping the gun on certain things, and like recognizing, like, we have a lot of people talking about the Schumann Resonances online. And God bless all of them, because the more people learn about this stuff, the better. But, maybe we should do a little bit more research on this before we pump out a video every single day on what they are and what's changing with them. Because if you've never read a research paper on them, you probably don't really understand them actually from like a true geophysical perspective, which is an important component to understanding what they are to the best of our ability. And so I think it just means being true to ourselves and being true to what's best for the collective. That's the age of Aquarius. How can I best serve the collective of humanity? Because I know that they'll serve me to the best of their ability. And doing that faithfully and honestly. And you're going to make mistakes at times, but as long as we keep on that consciousness evolution journey, it will all work out in the end. But yeah, I think it's an age of Saturn. Again, Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. So it's an age of responsibility and discipline. And we've been in this Piscean wonderland for so long. I think everyone's used to it, but like, we need to buckle up and like really get at it. And like, really, we need to move to a higher level and be honest with ourselves and be willing to take that on, and not just escape back to the Piscean fantasy land, which is a lot of cool stuff there. Like, it's given us all these amazing spiritual ideas and philosophies and beliefs, but it's time to put them into practice. That is what I believe. I think that we just have to be really honest with ourselves. Pluto is now moving through Aquarius, bringing light into dark places and exposing the truth. And that means exposing our own truths and the collective truths that maybe a lot of people don't want to actually recognize our truth. But people say everyone has their own truth, right? It's like, no, there's one truth. Like, or maybe not one, but truth is truth. It's not like you can have a truth and they have a truth. You can have an experience, they can have an experience. But fundamentally, there's just like the truth of the universe, what things are. And then there's things that can be distortions from that.
Yeah, I mean,
God is all of them. God is all of them. So
there's a piece in there around discernment that I'm hearing in the, like, as we're discussing, it's like the truth. And even just like you described someone talking about the AI and the quantum computer, and all of a sudden this is changing this, and it's like, what? And it's not even grounded in anything. And the ability to be able to be discerning is so important. And then you sort of go, okay, let's discern. And I think the challenge then hooks us up into, so far up until this point in our conscious evolution, we've been so reliant upon our five senses to be able to discern as to what's matter, what's real. And as we're going through this collective shift, even your recommendation was intuition. And it's like, whoa, because then that starts to turn intuition from this sort of woo, which it kind of is, but also into this hard science that you've got to sort of rudder yourself around in order to be able to discern, like, what does your gut have to say? And I mean, one of the conversations we had on the podcast was with this lady named Sonia Choquette. Not sure if you've come across her in your studies, but she studies intuition to the nth degree. She's an intuition teacher. And one of the studies she conducted, like Fortune 500 CEOs, Forbes 500, anyway, one of them. And she studied them and interviewed 100 of them. When asked about decision-making, it boiled down that 100 out of 100 of them said they make their decisions based on gut and intuition and instinct. And then the next question, I love this question she asked, bro. She goes, would you tell your 2IC, your second in charge, that that's how you made your decision? And I think it was 98 out of 100 of them said definitely not. And that's why all the rationale exists to cook up a story as to actually explain why we're going to go ahead and do what we did. But I just think it speaks to our time a little bit in terms of, hey, like, we're going to have to be hella more discerning. Yeah. And yet we've got to kind of ground into something like intuition to be able to feel into that discernment.
Yeah, and intuition is super Piscean. So we are recipients of that gift of now about 1,800, 2,000 years of Piscean energy. So all our ancestors going back to the boundary of the age of Aries and Pisces, working through that, developing these skills and these gifts, we are inheritors of that. So we should all be very thankful for them. And that is what we need to carry into the age of Aquarius, because we are going to have this plethora of information, not all of it factual. In my areas of expertise that I've studied a lot, again, there's always more to know, but in my areas of expertise where I know a thing or two, when I see AI provide answers on them, they're never fully accurate. There's always I'm just like, it just gives me the ick, to put it very simply. And so if you're not an expert in that field, though, because it's past the Turing test, you're like, that sounds really smart, right? But if you're an expert, you're like, that's a trash answer. I think AI is really good for like generating images and like this more taking an imagination and turning it into a product. But as it relates to like factual information, I think it has a big failing because, again, these distortions just get there. It has no ability to distinguish between facts and distortions. And so we need to really utilize that gift from the age of Pisces, which is intuition, to help us determine that, because us tapping into intuition is really tapping into God and seeing like what something actually is to a much greater degree. That's just kind of what seems to me. Yeah, it's a big philosophical open question / conversation / debate, but
Yeah,
I think
I mean,
it's really important.
What I'm taking away from this particular juncture in the conversation is, just the mystery and the majesty of it all and how it all comes together, and just how we're going to discern and navigate through this particular moment in time is. Yeah, it's a really fascinating time to be alive.
The last thing I would say is just like the butterfly effect. Just be cognizant of the butterfly effect, because if you believe something that perhaps is a complete fabrication, some imagination, let's say like someone created a UFO video, right? There's actually a few out there, which I think are a lot of people believe, which are totally fake, right? And then you shape your entire worldview around that. Like, hey, maybe that is what you needed to do for like your soul evolution journey, but personally, for myself, I would rather be grounded in the truth. I'd rather like be aligned to what actually happened in reality and not some complete fantasy. Um, and so the butterfly effect, like how is that then going to ripple out? Let's make sure our foundation is solid.
Yeah, I think that's important as well. And maybe, a lot of the best lessons are forged in fire. And maybe that's some of the fire this time is like, applying that discernment for our spiritual evolution so we can understand truth better. But by, kind of some of these forces that are sort of bending the tree the other way so that we can learn which way we actually want to bend. So, yeah. I mean, you mentioned this earlier, if it's okay. I'd like to just find out a little bit more about planetary resonances. I mean, there's an e-course you mentioned. Do we find it on your website? What's going on there?
Yeah, so the Planetary Resonances e-course is about 15 hours of video content. And basically, I've been studying geophysics, geology, Schumann resonances, started studying a lot into solar activity and stuff. But I was like, I noticed my own personal deficit with an understanding of the solar system. And I was like, I know there's something there. I mean, I've been studying astrology at this point now for a while, but in terms of like the larger energy system of the solar system, even from like an astronomical standpoint, not just astrological, but also astronomical, um, and archetypal, I was like, I really want to get that up to a really good level. And so the way that I've always learned is that I then teach. And so I basically did a crazy deep dive into this over like a few months, studying really deep into a lot of these subjects, which people talk about often, like precession or like the photon belt and things of this nature. And I produced the e-course as a result of that. And it's difficult for me to go into those topics all the time on my channel because there is so much activity with the sun and the earth on a human time scale. Whereas these planetary changes are typically very long cycles. So you're not pushing out a video every day on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. People like, it's just not necessary. It's a very long, low frequency signal. But if you want to learn about all those synodic cycles, you also want to learn about like the different asteroids and centaurs, the trans-Newtonian dwarf objects like Sedna and Orcus and Eris. And you also want to expand beyond to some of the different fixed stars and the precession of the equinoxes and cosmic cycles and more. That's all in that course. And that is a very valuable resource that I'm also will be updating with time as new things are found. I'll be putting new video modules in there, but that's all on the website wildfreeorganic.com/planetary resonances.
I love that. And for those that want to dive deeper, I mean, you were talking about some fascinating things on your YouTube channel. I'll link that in the show notes and the description below. For those that want to connect with Stefan deeper, anything else that's that you recommend for people, or is the YouTube a really good place to find you?
Yeah, YouTube is great. And like the overall recommendation that I give for people that have found resonance with this is that eventually I touch base on everything, because you can't cover everything in one video, right? So like this video will be on that. Some people are like, bro, you didn't cover this. And then other people are like, dude, your videos are too long. So anyways, if you watch the channel, eventually you get everything. I do pull content in from the Planetary Resonances e-course when it gets brought up. Sometimes I'll go in depth on Mercury or this or that, whatever. But the people that have been watching the channel for a while now, they have fundamentally have kind of touched everything to some degree. And that picture that forms is coming into clear and clear resolution. And of course, my picture and understanding of the universe is going to be different than yours or someone else's. I'd say just what I bring to the table is that I'm just looking at this from as much of a open yet truthful perspective. And I remain skeptical. So if I just read something, I don't immediately just take that in. Like when I read about the photon belt, which a lot of people talk about, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Then I did research into it. And turns out we don't really have any evidence of that. I think it's probably an archetype of some energetic changes that are occurring. But from a more literal perspective, personally, I'm not seeing evidence of that. So I think it's important to be open, but also discerning. And that's kind of the picture that I present. And I touch into all these different things because things that exist across all these domains are probably the closer or much closer to the truth than something that only manifests and exists at a very narrow slice and spectrum of reality. We want to see how things exist across all the different domains. Basically, generalized principles that they are true across everything and they don't invalidate each other. Because if one generalized principle exists that invalidates the other, then it's not a generalized principle. And that is what I'm on a quest to like discover and present and share with my audience. Because I think that's the direction we're going here on this planet with the Age of Aquarius, consciousness, and more. So
I
it's
love
my
it.
duty.
I love it. Brother, I've got to ask you a question. Here we've got, I mean, the Great Pyramids of Giza, yeah, and they sort of match up to Orion's belt in the sky. Yeah, like that's pretty trippy. I mean, it's still being bunked or debunked or rebunked. We're still trying to figure out what's going on underneath these pyramids with these big cylindrical sort of LiDAR scans that they've come through on. In your awareness, kind of what's like that mirroring like of what's going on in the sky and what's going on with the pyramids? Like, what do you think's going on there?
Well, I mean, I've been there. I was in Egypt back in 2023, and I went into like, what, 7 different pyramids. I went to a lot of temples, went to quite a few of the pyramids. I've only been there once. I'll definitely have to go back at some point, probably multiple times. But like in the Great Pyramid, definitely felt the energy. And some people feel a lot more. As with this girl we just met at the pyramids. She was energy sensitive, so we just kind of clicked. And she had like this full body reaction. Like all of a sudden, blood was just like kind of pumping through her. She like flushed out. She's like, "Oh my God!" Like the energy is so strong. So some people really feel it. I definitely felt something, but I wasn't like, about to have a fainting spell or something. But they created something very special and unique there. And I don't think we necessarily need to keep adding stuff onto it to make it special and unique, if that makes sense. Because my background before the YouTube channel was with passive seismic, where you put a seismograph and you add a geophone and you measure the ambient vibrations of the ground surface. They're called microtremors, or you have microtremor analysis. I did that for quite a few years before the YouTube channel. I need to read the research paper that they pushed out, but they use a combination of satellite imagery and also passive seismic to come to these conclusions. Well, passive seismic is very low resolution. So to be able to discern structures like that with passive seismic is not a thing. Now, to stay open, perhaps with the combination of the satellite measurements, who knows? I need to read a research paper. But I lean more in the direction that that's probably not accurate. And again, I just don't think we need to make the pyramids more than they actually are, because they're already enough. Like all of us are already enough. And they're already incredible. And what they did was amazing. And I think they anchor in certain energies on our planet that we don't even understand across time. And they don't need to have these special chambers underneath them or spiral staircases. They don't need to be some UFO energy generator, pouring metals down the ducts to generate some sort of beam of plasma up to the UFO. We don't need any of that for them. I don't know maybe they were used for that stuff, but I just don't think that's that. I think they were just a pure work of love and devotion by the ancient peoples to try to create something as close to God as possible. And to, again, the ancient Egyptians with the lotus flower, they were very connected to the astral realms. And so I think there's actually a lot of wisdom there, if we speak from that perspective, that we could relearn. And we're thinking about it perhaps from a too materialistic standpoint, from a too 21st or 20th century standpoint. I think we need to go back to a deeper understanding. And I think that's really deep in the dream space, the Aborigine, dream world. I think that's where actually the past, the present, and the future is more so than some ancient technology that levitated these blocks into place or something. I just think that's so industrial revolution mindset where everything has to be, some fanciful technology. It's cool. I love it, but I don't think that has to be what it is. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Why do you reckon they singled out Orion?
Well, I mean, if you go back to our trine constellation in the sky right now, Orion is smack dab in the center of that, which is interesting. And Orion is basically always visible because it's above the ecliptic plane. Generally, I mean, it depends, but Orion is usually very visible in the night sky, so it's very obvious. I mean, you have Rigel, you have Betelgeuse, you have the belt of Orion, you have Sirius nearby. It's just a very prominent part in the sky, and I think it just naturally happened. The first pyramid was built, and then they built another one, another one. I think they just were like, know what? Let's line it up, yo. Let's do it. Let's make it cool. I think, I don't know. Maybe there's a lot more to it. But I think the ancient peoples were looking at the sky much more than we are because they didn't have light pollution. They didn't have fancy astrological chart calculators. I think what they actually saw in the sky was so much more important. They place a lot more importance on it than we do nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, when you don't have television and devices, I mean, a good fireplace and staring at the night sky is a
Oh, yeah.
pretty good way to get done. To be honest. I mean, we used
Lotus
to,
flower wine.
yeah, and watching like a asteroid shower, like I mean, sorry, a meteor shower, like I mean, just you're in, makes you, and even just the way not asteroids, sorry, comets sort of, and those like celestial bodies sort of when they do cut through our atmosphere, the angle that they cut through on is so not what you'd expect. Like you sort of see something sort of shooting across, but it's like always the weirdest sort of angle that they cut through. It's always really fascinating to watch. I think there's just one last little part of the stone I'd love to unturn, which is, and it's probably a broader question, and I mean, we've been talking about it throughout, but I just wonder if there's any sort of nooks and crannies left to sort of flush out in terms of this sort of electric and then magnetic awareness of like when I start tuning into yourself. I mean, for me, there's that E equals MC squared, right? Like Einstein's famous equation, like energy is a constant and then mass. And it's like pretty much they're one for one. It's like it's just hidden behind this square of this constant. And then it's fascinating speaking to a geophysicist, which most people, when they attach the word physicist in, it becomes very matter and very coalesced. But as I start to talk to you, it's grounded in matter, but it's all like, yeah, and it's all vibratory, like get with it. Let's catch up now, So it's really awesome chatting to you in that space. And then there's this awareness that it's vibration, but then somehow there's also this vibratory, you can ground in a little bit around electricity and magnetism. So I just kind of wanted to just scratch the itch on that before I let you go.
Just like to talk about more about the fundamental force of electromagnetism.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I mean, in terms of it, like the universe, like electric, like it just seems like everything's electric. I mean, but then the difference between what's electric and what's magnetic, like I know there's probably a whole new podcast to start from here. Maybe we can, scratch the itch and then turn it into part 2 in the future. But yeah, just your awareness around the electric nature of our universe and the magnetic natures of our universe.
Yeah. Well, so far we have our current understanding is that there's 4 fundamental forces, and these are forces of attraction. Basically, they form what we call fields. But what is a field? It's just like they just always exist to some degree everywhere. That's gravity, it's electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force. These two operate at the atomic scale. So as it relates to our reality, from what we know currently, which is probably not that much, the electromagnetic force and the gravitational force are the big ones. Electromagnetism is much, much, much stronger than gravity. Much stronger. 10 to 36 zeros. So gravity is very important. And that's one of the things. People that start to study into electromagnetism, all of a sudden they just completely discount gravity. And like, oh, gravity doesn't exist anymore. It's like, well, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, jump off a building, bro, and see if you're going to be like discounting gravity then. So it's really important. But electromagnetism is kind of where like the future lies a little bit more, because as we come to better understanding of it, the potential of it starts to become really, really cool. Like, for example, with a superconductor, if you take a neodymium magnet and basically apply like liquid nitrogen to it, cool it to a certain temperature, you can freeze the field lines. Or the inverse would be you have a neodymium magnet, and then you have like a little graphite puck, and then you cool that down to a superconducting temperature, and it can stay locked now in this magnetic field. It completely resists the force of gravity because, again, electromagnetism is so much stronger, and now you have like this floating thing. Electric fields and magnetic fields are like perpendicular to each other, but they're very similar. In many ways, they're kind of like the same thing, but they're not. It's kind of hard to encapsulate. And they create each other because a magnetic field will generate an electric field, or just rather a change in magnetism induces a change in electricity, which generates a change in magnetism, and it goes back and forth reciprocally, constantly changing the angles of it and reducing intensity until eventually it peters out. But that actually forms like a spiral pattern you could think of. And so there's these interactions where sometimes the magnetic field is what's like the magnetic force is what's the relevant one versus the electric force. So an example of that would be our cells have an electric potential. And so the cell membrane is polarized. It has this electric charge to it. So if you apply an electric field, it's not really going to pierce through that membrane unless it completely depolarizes the cell. But a magnetic field can basically pass through that membrane, especially if it's a low enough frequency, and therefore it can interact directly with DNA. And that's what we see with the Schumann resonances. It's able to pass through the electric potential effectively and the field, the charge of the cell membrane, and also the nucleus, which inside the cell also has a bit of electric potential, and basically directly interact with DNA. Whereas the magnetic field passing through our body at the cellular level isn't that strong. Like the magnetic field of the earth, the magnetic field of our heart, it's important, don't get me wrong. But at the cellular level, like in between cells, it's the electric field that's really potential. Cellular voltage gradients seem to have a very strong influence over the behaviors of cells individually and group, and also their expression of DNA. So they've done studies where they change the cellular voltage gradient of like an embryo, specifically for like a tadpole. And they'll measure the electric voltage gradient, the cellular voltage gradient for like the heart tissue of this little tadpole embryo. And then they applied that to like the tail of the tadpole, and all of a sudden started growing heart tissue there. And then they applied and reversed the, cellular voltage gradient of the tail, and it went right back because it's in like this primordial state. So it can still, it can still handle all this stuff. It can still change and mutate. And so they have these tremendous abilities to interact with us biologically. And they're like two brothers or two sisters or brother and sister that like stayed like this all throughout life. And they're not the same, but they're always kind of batting off each other. I feel like I don't really have a good answer for you because I don't even really know myself.
Oh man,
it's such
I've
an open
learned.
field.
Even just your sharing, like the fact that it's that much stronger than gravitational, like I mean, is so profound in and of itself. And then thinking about that it exists in cells, it exists between planets. I mean, there's so much in there. Thank you so much for, yeah. I mean, while we're talking about cells and planets, I mean, if you're open to it, could we dive into a bit of a short sound journey? Would you be open to that, brother?
Yeah. I love this sound bowl, which is for the crown chakra.
Mm.
And in general, every time I play this, people just absolutely love it. It's such a nice, healing, resonant frequency. And so,
What note is it tuned to? Do you mind me asking?
oh, I would have to look at my phone. I use my phone as my webcam, but it's like, I think it's 242 hertz.
Okay.
I believe that's a frequency. I can send it to you over email, and you can put that in the show notes if you want.
I'll do that. Thanks, brother.
But it's a very nice frequency. And so you can just tune in just for a little bit. Aho, aho.
I mean, even the soft sort of sounds that we hear about just digital sort of sounds that carry over podcasts just over the waves and stuff now currently sounds like running water. Talking about coherence, brother. Stefan Burns. I mean, so much left yet to chat about. Space, time, language. Hopefully you do us the honor of coming back again in the future. Thank you so much for sharing yourself so abundantly here with us today. And I mean, I can obviously thank you for your time and energy, which I am grateful. But also this is your life's work. I mean, I'm just honoring the brother that is you. And like you said, you know, the work you're doing, you feel so connected to the planet and the way that you're carrying it. It's an absolute blessing. Thank you for you, bro. Appreciate you.
Thank you. God bless you as well. Tremendous honor to be here. And I hope that one day we can sit out in the outback and look at the darkness between the stars.
After a couple of really big hugs.
Yeah, let's do it.
I look forward to it.
I loved it because you weren't afraid to go into some of these places, and some people come with like pretty strong agendas for podcasts. Like I have this, and I want to stay to talking points, whatever. But you know, I really enjoy going into these more philosophical areas because I discuss on the channel more so with live streams, but I don't go there all the time. And that space is like a very unique, rare space, and it was very open for that, and it was amazing. So yeah, really think this is an awesome episode. I'm gonna be really happy to share this with my audience. They're gonna just go nuts for it, and very thankful for you for creating this. And I've seen some of your videos, and in general, you're one of those keystones for this community where you're there's a few podcasters. You're, I think, probably one of the bigger ones that is talking to all the different people that have their own channels who talk about this. So it's like holding the arch together.
Oh, thank you, brother, man. That means a lot. Yo, inspired soul, lumen beings, you've made it to the end of another incredible episode. Stefan is such a wizard. It is such a pleasure to have him on the podcast. If you liked this video, you've made it all the way through to the end, so I assume you do. Please don't forget to like and give this video a thumbs up. It gives the algorithm permission to share this video around with more people around the planet. And if you're inspired and you believe someone could benefit from this video, please do share it with them. It helps with everything we're doing here. And to all of you that are subscribed to the channel, a massive hey yeah. Taking out a moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to the podcast. As I like to say, and it's absolutely true, everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. Thank you so much for your loving support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, join the movement, promoting love, positivity, and wisdom like this around the planet together. Thank you so much in advance for doing so. If you love this conversation with Stefan Burns, you're absolutely going to love this conversation we had with Robert Edward Grant. Click on that, check it out now. I'll see you over there.